Well, hey guys, welcome back to the salon. Long time no see. So, as you guys who have been around for any length of time are probably aware, I've been very, very slowly making my way through the 1960s thriller TV series hosted by Boris Karloff. Now, up to this point, I've been making videos discussing 6 episodes at a time, which, to be honest, is a tradition that I can't even remember, like, why I started doing that. I'm sure there was a reason, but I don't know what it is now. And so I'm starting to think, though, that maybe that's too much and that I should just concentrate on one episode at a time so that each video isn't such a massive undertaking. Because, I mean, each episode of Thriller is almost an hour long. So after watching almost 6 hours of content, I have to make all these detailed notes about it and then record and edit the video. And then the video usually ends up being like an hour and a half long. And the nature of the task was just getting to be so daunting that it kept making me like put off doing it because I'm like, oh my god, that's going to take forever and I don't have time and all this other kind of stuff. I'm going to do the same thing with my night gallery posts as well. So I figure if I just start doing one episode, per video, then I'll get more of them done because they're not so time consuming. And like, hopefully that's okay with everyone. I just want to be able to get more content out like in a more timely fashion because I get a lot of messages that you guys like these and I like doing them too, but I want to be able to make more of them quicker and not feel like, oh my god, there's this big like mountain I have to climb. Like I just want it to be like a little hill and then I'll put a video out and then I can just watch another episode. You know what I mean? So anyway, enough housekeeping. Where were we? So when we last left Thriller, we were discussing season 2, episode 6. So let's move on to episode 7, which is called The Last of the Sommervilles. Now, this one was co-written and directed by Ida Lupino, who did several episodes of the series. And really kind of her innovative camera work is as apparent in this outing as it is in the previously discussed episodes that she had done. She really does have a very distinctive style that you can always tell which ones are hers. Boris Karloff also has a real fun turn in this one. I always like when he stars in them and doesn't just host them. He kind of plays this smarmy, not to be trusted doctor character. Now, I'm going to say this installment is yet another one that's centered around, scheming shitheads planning to bump off an aging relative to get their grubby mitts on some sweet cash. It's still pretty solid. It's nicely atmospheric. It has a little bit of a comedic flair thrown in there too, for good measure. Now, the episode has this really great, very gothic looking and immediately engaging, like, cold open. There's this hooded figure, and they're dragging a wrapped dead body, what's clearly a dead body, across this foggy moor at night. And then they throw the stiff in a hole, and then they bury it. And then when the hood of the cloak falls back, we see that the person who is presumably the murderer, is this woman who she looks like super satisfied with her handiwork, and she kind of gives this, mwahaha kind of like look like back towards in the direction of the grave that she just dug. We don't actually find out who this is until a few minutes later, and we don't actually find out who the body is until a significant amount of time later. So meanwhile, you have this dude named Rutherford, because of course it is. He shows up at this mansion, whose grounds the corpse has just been buried in. Now, Rutherford, we discover, is the nephew of the elderly Aunt Celia Sommerville and has arrived to visit her after 15 years. So before he even opens his mouth that he's going to be, like, asking her for some money. Now, the woman who answers the door is the same woman that we just saw burying the body earlier. Rutherford at first thinks that she's the housekeeper because she kind of, she answers the door and she kind of looks like she has like dowdy black clothes on like a housekeeper would. But it turns out that this is actually Ursula Sommerville, who is like a distant cousin of his and who lives in the house and looks after Aunt Celia because she's old. Now, Rutherford seems a bit taken aback because he'd never heard of this relative before, but, in the end, he just kind of rolls with it. Now, true to form, he goes right up to Aunt Celia's room and starts laying on the charm, Aunt Celia herself, gotta say, she's just this very pleasantly dotty, theatrical old bat kind of thing. She has this poofy hair, like super overdone makeup, and this ridiculously like feathery dressing gown type situation. And she's just so over the top that I immediately loved her goofy ass, and I just wanted to like get drunk with her. Like she's that kind of like old, like I used to dance with Flo Ziegfeld type of lady, and I was just kind of like, yeah, I want to hang out with her. She seems pretty cool. So she actually starts chiding Rutherford, like in a loving way, for not visiting her more often. And she actually ends up giving a little bit of exposition that she previously gave him some money to invest in some African gold mine investment or something like that. And funny she should mention that, because Rutherford has another very exciting investment opportunity for her. And I'm sure she's like super jazzed about it. Like, he's heading off to Paris soon, you see, for some kind of nebulous business thing. And that will necessitate him buying some shares. And all he needs from her is the low, low price of a paltry $1,000. Which kind of seems pretty reasonable, all things considered. I was thinking he was going to ask for some, like, ridiculous sum, but he doesn't. He just asked for $1,000. But then I was like, well, how much? That was probably, like, a lot more money back then. So I looked it up. $1,000 in 1961 actually equates to about $10,500 today. So it's not quite as paltry a sum as I initially thought. But still, I kind of expected him to ask for more. I don't know. I barely know the guy, but I'm just saying he just seemed like somebody that would be like, I need $100,000. You know what I mean? But he didn't. Now, Celia actually seems open to this idea. It's only $1,000 after all, like in 1961 money. But she actually, at the moment, has more pressing matters to attend to. She's having a big party tonight, she says, and she likes to take a really, really long bath before parties because that's her beauty secret, you know what I mean? And she's like a super, super old lady, so it's kind of like played for laughs that she says that. So she scoots off to do the bath without making any kind of decision about the money. Now, Ursula, after she gets Celia kind of squared away in the tub, tells Rutherford, this is kind of funny, that there's no party, like no one's coming over. Celia just likes to imagine that she's having these big shindigs like back in the old days when she was a social butterfly. So she doesn't seem crazy necessarily, but it's just kind of like one of those little eccentricities that they're all kind of like, yes, of course you're having like a big party, and it's all like imaginary people. Oh, and during this discussion, there's also a mention of Celia's sister, whose name is Sophie, and who is possibly, maybe, attending the party. Hey, maybe Sophie will show up at the party. Ursula tells Celia, don't be silly. You know very well that Sophie is vacationing in Europe and she won't be able to come to your party. Now remember this little detail for later because this is kind of important. So as the evening wanes, Ursula and Rutherford have like a bit of a little conversation. And Ursula happens to let it slip, obviously on purpose, that Celia isn't quite as healthy as she might appear to be, and has actually been suffering from some sort of unspecified heart seizures. Is that a thing? I don't know. I've never heard of that. Now, neither of these assholes is making any secret about their desire for this hammy old biddy to just pop her clogs already and let them have some money. So Rutherford stays at the house for a week, and he's basically just kissing Celia's butt the whole time. This is not really shown. But he keeps frequently reminding her about this investment opportunity and trying to speed up the whole money scamming process. But what he doesn't know is that every time he seems to have talked Celia into writing a check, Ursula like goes behind his back and insinuates that Rutherford is this shiftless, dirty gambler who's just going to blow the money, which I think is implied is actually true, so she's not making it up. So Rutherford is getting kind of desperate, and he starts lamenting to Ursula about this, like, forever that it's taking for Celia to decide whether she's going to fork him over the dough. Now Ursula, who evidently has no shame and not a bit of conscience either, basically tells Rutherford straight up that she is pretty much the sole beneficiary of Celia's will. She offers Rutherford 20 grand out of the sum if he'll kind of help the old woman shuffle off the mortal coil, you know what I mean? And he has to make it look all accidental-like. Now, she implies that she would do it herself, of course, but the authorities would suspect her immediately since she's the only person that would benefit from, you know, the old lady's death. Rutherford, who isn't named in the will, wouldn't even be a blip on the radar because he wouldn't stand to benefit, so why should he kill her? That's the argument that she makes anyway. Now, Rutherford isn't sure he's up for this. I mean, she's asking him to murder somebody, and somebody he seems to actually like, even though he's just trying to get money out of her. But Ursula has clearly been thinking about this shit for a long time and has a plan all worked out. And it kind of involves Celia's previously alluded to love of long baths. So they kind of don't get into the, meat of the plan because you get to see a little bit of that later. But they set up a day to do the deed and they kind of have alibis worked out and whatnot. However, Celia, unknowingly, interferes with their little dastardly plot by inviting her old friend, Dr. Farnham, who is played by Boris Karloff in a very funny hairstyle. She invites him to dinner on the specified murder night. Now, Rutherford and Ursula, when she announces this, oh, Dr. Farnham's coming over, they actually aren't sure if Dr. Farnham is really going to show up or if this is like another imaginary party, like the ones that Celia usually has, which I thought was like a really funny detail for some reason. Like, Ursula is like, okay, well, I'm going to go think about this. I'll think up a backup plan in case the doctor really does show up. And this plan actually turns out to be an even better plan than the one she had come up with originally. I mean, she's a doer, that Ursula. Like, she kind of thinks on her feet. Now, Dr. Farnham does indeed arrive and is also very obviously another grifter. I mean, he's just kind of smooching and fawning all over Celia in an attempt to, get a piece of her pie, so to speak. I think he even implies that he might want to marry her. Ursula tells Celia and the doctor that Rutherford went to town to play cards with his friends, like at a bar or something, and won't be joining them for dinner. Now, in reality, Rutherford did do that, like earlier in the evening, obviously to establish an alibi and get seen by a bunch of people. But then he kind of got away and he snuck back into the mansion and sort of bided his time in the basement, like waiting for his moment to strike, So then, after dinner, Ursula claims that she also has to go to town for some charity event that she's attending. And she manages to kind of indirectly get Dr. Farnham to offer to drive her. I mean, that was exactly what she hoped would happen, but she didn't want to come up and be suspicious by just like, hey, can you drive me to town? Like, she kind of made it seem like, oh, the weather's not very good and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, of course I'll drive you because he's a gentleman. So, but that's kind of her whole plan, because if she's with Farnham, of course, then she can't have been responsible for killing Aunt Celia because, obviously he's there with her and can vouch. It's almost like the perfect crime. So after Ursula goes with Dr. Farnham, Rutherford creeps out of the basement and starts to put the plot into motion. Now, the plot is actually kind of out there, but admittedly pretty clever, although I have no idea if it would work in reality. I don't know if I wanted that in my Google search. Basically, the potential murderers have rigged a live lamp cord to one of Celia's bath sponges. So I'm presuming when she gets it wet, she'll get electrocuted, right? And then all Rutherford has to do is just remove the sponge and the lamp from the scene and leave everything else as it is. And it will look, for all the world, like Celia simply had one of those heart seizures we mentioned earlier and just keeled over in the tub that she loved so much. So this kind of cockamamie plan actually works like gangbusters. And Celia drops dead just as they thought was going to happen. And she gets planted in the cemetery before you can say vaudeville is dead. Celia's lawyer, Mr. Parchester, asks about the will, and then he gives some reason why it can't be read immediately. I can't remember exactly what the reason was. But Ursula, who is faking being super, super sad, you guys, says, oh, that's fine. I'm not in any hurry. We can do the reading of the will a week from Friday. I don't remember what day it was that day, but it was a while, you know what I mean? It was a week and a half. Rutherford absolutely blows his stack after the lawyer leaves because he's like, at this rate, it's going to be at least 2 weeks before I can get this 20 large that you promised me, and I need it now, god damn it, kind of thing. I don't think they say this, but it's implied that he needs it to pay some gambling debts or something like that, and maybe, I don't know, maybe they're going to break his legs, I don't know. Now, Ursula basically says, calm your tits, I don't want to be in a big rush because it will look suspicious. So Rutherford, of course, grumbles about this, but, has to concede that, yes, of course, she's right. Shortly afterward, though, a small wrinkle appears in their carefully calculated scheme. An anonymous note shows up in the mailbox that claims to know that Celia was murdered. Now, neither one of them can figure out who wrote it, and Ursula actually blames Rutherford for drinking too much in town that time when he was playing cards and running his mouth and possibly telling somebody some shit without realizing it. And then Rutherford blames Ursula for maybe letting something slip to Dr. Farnham, like when he wasn't there and they had that whole situation. Now, the wheels start turning in Ursula's head, and she starts to think, maybe Dr. Farnham was behind the note too, even though she denies telling him anything. She's like, maybe he found out some other way. But she says, no problem. Hey, Rutherford, all you have to do is just have him meet with an accident as well. The bodies are really piling up. Now, Rutherford obviously kind of balks at this. He's kind of a sleaze, but he doesn't really fancy himself a killer. And honestly, offing Celia was about as much murdering as he seemed to be able to handle. So Ursula, though, then pulls out kind of the ace up her sleeve. She indirectly threatens Rutherford by telling him, hey, you remember old Aunt Sophie, Celia's sister, who was supposedly on vacation in Europe? Guess what? She's not in Europe at all. I killed her. And in fact, it was Sophie that we saw her burying at the beginning of the story. So the implication here, I'm guessing, is that if Rutherford doesn't do what she wants, then she'll kill him too, and she'll get away with it just like she got away with killing Sophie because everyone just thinks she's away. So Ursula goes into town for something or other, and while she's away, Dr. Farnham actually stops by the mansion unannounced and has a little chat with Rutherford. And this chat is a little bit, I don't want to say hostile, but it's very suggestive, very creepy. And the tone of the conversation solidifies in Rutherford's mind that Dr. Farnham absolutely does know that Rutherford and Ursula were the ones who killed Celia. He also indirectly implies that he knows Sophie is dead as well. So Rutherford at this point is understandably shitting bricks about this whole situation. Later that night, Ursula wakes Rutherford up and tells him, hey, there's somebody out on the grounds of the mansion, possibly spying on us. It must be Dr. Farnham. And so she hands Rutherford a gun. She's making him do all the dirty work here, for obvious reasons. So they both go kind of creeping out into this horribly foggy night, in search of this prowler or this spy or whatever. However, as anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together has already figured out, Ursula is double-crossing Rutherford so she doesn't have to pay him the 20 grand that she said she would pay him for killing Celia. There is not anyone out in the yard. It's just an old coat hanging in a tree that kind of looks like a person from far away from the window. And Ursula ends up leading Rutherford right into this very convenient bog that they have. She probably just keeps the bog there, for murdering purposes. I mean, it is kind of handy to have that around, I guess. So she leads him to it, and then he falls in it, and he just, slowly sinks. And he's just, screaming the whole entire way and, probably cursing himself for being such a dumbass knob. So Ursula very coldly just sits there on the shore and watches him die. Then she just sashays back to the house and she don't have to share the money with nobody. So we then skip ahead to the following Friday, which is of course the reading of the will. As previously explained, Ursula inherits pretty much everything. She gets the mansion and all of Celia's money and expensive art and tech and antiques and stuff. I think there was a couple of other things that went to other people, but it was just bullshit stuff. She got pretty much everything. However, there's a catch. It turns out that as a condition of receiving the inheritance, Ursula has to marry the last male Sommerville, who of course was Rutherford, who, if you'll remember, is currently decomposing at the bottom of the bog on the property, that convenient bog. If Ursula doesn't marry Rutherford, she gets nothing, and the whole enchilada instead reverts to the lawyer, Mr. Parchester. And you're thinking to yourself, shit, Ursula done fucked up. She did all of that for nothing. Or did she? Because in a second twist, which is revealed 2 seconds after that first one, it turns out that Ursula and Mr. Parchester were an item all along and had planned this entire thing from the beginning. Ursula married Parchester, as evidenced by this enormous, super, super tacky as fuck ring on her finger. It's just... seriously, it's hideous. So now both of them are stinking rich and seen as their sucking face, and they're obviously very, very pleased with themselves. Here's the funny part, though. Because this was 1960s TV, and fictional shows weren't actually allowed to have the bad guys get away with their shenanigans. Boris Karloff comes on as host in a little coda, like at the end of the story. He's standing in front of the Sommerville mansion, which now has a for sale sign on the gate. And he explains that both Ursula and Parchester were killed in a car accident off screen. Like, ironically, they sank into the same bog that contained Rutherford's rotting carcass. So, poetic justice. So they actually did not live to enjoy the fruits of their skullduggery. Sort of lame, I have to say. I mean, they could have at least showed this instead of like having Boris Karloff just explain it. Oh, by the way, they're dead. The end. You know what I mean? I guess Alfred Hitchcock used to do a similar thing, so I guess I'll allow it. But I don't know why they didn't just shoot another, like, literally 2-minute scene showing them driving in a car being like, look how rich we are, honey. Oh, shit. You know what I mean? It would have literally taken 2 seconds to, like, shoot that. I don't know why they did it like that, but whatever. They did. So, as I mentioned, this was another pretty decent, but kind of middle-of-the-road episode. It does have sort of a very tired premise. A lot of the thriller shows were about, scheming relatives, like trying to bump off somebody, like, to get money. But it did have a couple of twists and turns that I didn't really see coming. Most of them were telegraphed pretty obviously. Like I said, this is, 1960s. A lot of this stuff has been done a lot since then, so there's not really a lot of surprises. I have to say that I really, really loved Phyllis Thaxter playing Ursula. She was, like, totally cold-blooded, and I was totally there for it. And Boris Karloff and Martita Hunt, who played Celia, they were, like, a really lot of fun. They were both, like, super over the top, and again, I was really into it. The camera work here is also really interesting in places. Like I said, it's Ida Lupino. She kind of had a really good eye for that kind of stuff. And the whole story just had this really nice sort of gothic atmosphere to it. And that went a long way toward elevating this episode above some of the lesser episodes of the series. I mean, it's not great, but it's a pretty damn good episode for this type of thing. So that will do it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment. And I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.